Elizabeth McDonald, Gillian Turner, Steve Moore, Boris Epshteyn, and Lee Carter. All right, Lee, tell us, how big is this?
You really want me to answer this, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
It's huge.
Huge.
I think, we're waiting here, and this isn't just getting an endorsement, right? I think we're basically putting together a cabinet. I mean, he's going out and he's saying, one by one, this isn't just about me anymore. Look at the people I'm surrounding myself with.
So we got the Attorney General, and now we got the Surgeon General. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's pretty much what we're saying.
Well, he also talked about him in terms of education, too. So it could be someone who's very involved in education, Ben Carson. That was mentioned yesterday in Trump's speech.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he talked about it.
So he'll bring the more evangelicals, and he'll bring his grassroots operation. And what's going to be interesting is how Ben Carson and Donald Trump will now be talking policy, and where will Dr. Ben Carson weigh in on? Could it be on Common Core, as Boris pointed out, or education, or even further beyond that?
And then, of course, there's this idea that last night's debate, speaking of the debate, Lee, you're the expert on, did you do your dials?
I did, yeah.
The civility of it all, was that good or bad? And Twitter sphere, this social media was kind of disappointed, because of the. Listen, people love to watch the car crashes, right? I mean,
right.
And did it work overall, you think?
Look, I think a lot of the dials we saw, they were never as high as we often see them. I think a lot of people were waiting for the punchline, especially when Trump was up and he was going. But overall, what we heard, especially from Kasich, especially from Rubio, we saw that even the Democrats were responding really, really favorable to these guys. When they were talking about policy, when they were talking about issues, when they were talking about security, when they were talking about education, when they were talking about issues of substance, people were responding. And I think even Trump, when he was talking about, this is time for us to come together. Let's talk about solutions.
Wait, stay in that. You said even Democrats, because Trump likes to say, I am also pulling in a lot of Democrats, too. So, you see that in Florida, early poll, early voting showing 18% higher than in 2012, 2014. Academics and researchers, they're saying that could be Trump pulling out voters they wouldn't have seen before.
I see that Rubio is winning that early vote in Florida. So we'll see, But essentially, also, I think is interesting, Gillian, is that to your point about the civility aspect of it, a lot of people say, listen, Donald Trump, he hit the stage being bombastic. I understand he's shifting toward that presidential general election thing. Could it be shifting too soon? Listen, at this point, his core supporters are his core supporters, so he knows he's got them in the bag. Is this the right time to make the move?
I think it is the right time, and especially in a debate like last night where there were some foreign policy topics that were really kind of hard-hitting topics. We were talking about peace in the Middle East. We're talking about re-engaging with Cuba. I mean, you need to sound presidential on these issues. And part of the thing there is that his core supporters, as you mentioned, are going to stick with him. But even though there was civility, there wasn't any lack of zing. I mean, Marco Rubio came in with some great quips last night.
I want to ask you about that, Gillian, too, because that's one of the rare areas where you really have some distinct differences with respect to how each of these candidates would have their administration when you talk about the Middle East and when you talk about specifically Israel. And it could be a high-stakes gambit, if you will, to the idea that you would go into a negotiating process and an American would treating Israel, the Israelis and the Palestinians on the same level. How's that going to work out?
It's a sharp distinction between the three against Trump. Trump is kind of all of a sudden, strangely, I think, on this issue, saying he's going to remain neutral. He's not going to kind of side with the Israelis, which is a very strange stance for somebody who admires what he calls strong leaders to take, because Prime Minister Netanyahu is nothing if not a strong, bullish leader, and they would make a perfect fit.
Right, and on the flip side of that, also, Trump has been saying, we've got to batten down on our trade policies. We're losing jobs to countries like China. Well, you also need China to rein in North Korea, which has nuclear aspirations. 75% of North Korea's trade is with China. You need to keep China in the wheelhouse to keep North Korea in check. So this is going to be really interesting what's coming up at this press conference.
To go back to Israel for a second, and as someone who's Jewish and a very strong pro-Israel supporter and a Trump supporter, it's a nuanced issue. It's one thing for Rubio and Cruz and Kasich. Cruz was someone who's made some lightly veiled anti-Semitic comments throughout the campaign. Seinfeld candidacy, New York values. It's one thing to go out and scream on pro-Israel. Donald Trump is looking at this pragmatically.
You think Rubio, so a senator from Florida,
Cruz.
which has a okay, I thought you said Rubio.
No, Cruz.
Okay,
with the Seinfeld candidacy and the New York values. Those were comments that at least hit me, and there's been a lot of discussion about this as anti-Semitic. So Trump is somebody who's pragmatic. He has gotten a lot of deals done before, and he's looking at this and saying, listen, if you go into a negotiation and you're saying, I'm going 100% siding with one side, you're never going to get anything done. And he keeps saying over and over again, this would be the toughest deal he's ever made.
But in the same breath, and he was right. I thought right on the money when he said that this will be the toughest deal he or anyone else is ever going to strike. But in the same breath, he said, "Oh, but I love Israel.
Right.
I was the Grand Marshal of the Israeli campaign." That's not really neutrality.
Right.
That's a little bit of a.
And you think he'll go into the negotiation neutral, sorry.
Yeah, and we understand that that's his starting point, but. One of the big knocks against President Obama is we are at a point right now where none of our allies trust us. In other words, they wonder where we are, if they can if we can't get the tribal leaders in these countries that need to be on our side to crush ISIS because they think we'll come for 6 months or a year and then retreat again. And so essentially, is that the sort of confidence builder that the Israelis need to know if they're going to go, that he's treating both sides the same, even though Israel has, we understand the atrocities that have happened in Israel. I think this week there were some major atrocities where,
shootings in Israel,
shootings and murders, even in American tourists. So in this particular case, does that give Israel less confidence in a Donald Trump? Because he's already saying out the gate that he's negating, to a certain degree, all of the bad things that have happened.
But he's not. And if you listen to what he said in his speeches and during the debates, he's been very strong and very defiant on the fact that Israel has been hurt by the Palestinians. His point is, when you sit down for the negotiation, which has to happen, right? I would love for the state of Israel to remain exactly as it is and grow stronger and stronger and stronger. But we see what's happening every day. You need a solution. So from his point of view, to get to a solution, you need to at least start by allowing both sides to speak and give them equal time.
He also said he would dramatically escalate the U.S. presence in the Middle East with 30,000 U.S. troops on the ground to battle ISIS. Said that in debates.
Okay, hold on 1 second, because I want to bring in Steve Moore. We've got Steve Moore with us as well, and I know he likes Donald Trump, particularly on the economic side. You haven't endorsed anyone, but you do like Donald Trump. EMAC brought up China and trade. And I think with you, this is a question I want to ask you as an economic expert. How do we go about this? Massive tariffs. Most economists I know shoot that down. They say that would be economic suicide for everyone.
Hi, Charles. By the way, I like Trump voters. I'm not so sure. I don't always agree with Trump by any means. Look, I think the area where I disagree the most with Donald Trump is on trade, Charles. I mean, you and I are free traders. We know that when you bring tariffs down, it's a tax cut for the American consumer. I agree with John Kasich, and I agree with Ted Cruz that, if you've got a level playing field, there's no question America can outcompete anyone.
How do we level the playing field, though? If listen, one thing the viewing audience needs to understand. Let's set it up for the audience, though, because I think there's a lot of hyperbolic and a lot of misinformation out there. Every country uses tariffs. Everyone out there needs to understand this. Every single country uses tariffs. China's happen to be a lot higher than ours. So, in Mexico, too, for that matter. How do we level the playing field if we don't fight fire with fire, Steve?
Well, the guy who had the best answer to that question last night was clearly Ted Cruz. Now, I'm a little biased because I helped write Ted Cruz's tax plan. But what you do, Charles, is you deal with this through the tax system. So, I think Ted did a pretty good job last night of explaining this. We have the dumbest tax system in the world. What we do in the United States, Charles, you know this, we tax what we produce. But we won't tax what's imported. And basically, Cruz would reverse that through a kind of consumption tax. So basically, when something is brought into the United States, there would be a tax imposed on it. You could call it a tariff, whatever you want. And if something is produced and manufactured here in Michigan or Indiana or California with American workers and it's sold abroad, there's no tax. Now, Charles, that would level the playing field.
All right, Boris, you're shaking your head, though. Well, Boris, you're a Wall Street guy.
Right.
What don't you like about what Steve Moore just said?
Well, it's more what I do like about what Trump said. And what Trump is saying is not he's going to impose the tariffs, is he's going to threaten the tariffs. Again, it's all part of the negotiations, right? You go back to the book, part of the deal. Part of the negotiation is to say, listen, here's how you do business right now. Let's figure out how we get to fair trade. Let's figure out how to have smart trade. And you lower your tariffs, you give it on currency, and we're able to do business the way we have been.
And knowing China, You honestly believe that they're going to blink and say, okay?
I think that he's the only one we have running for president who they would blink in front of.
I think, honestly...
I don't...
Well, before you jump in, Steve, I'll just throw in my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I honestly think that China's leaders, right now they're fighting 3 fights. They're trying to keep their stock market up, their economy up, and their currency up. They have $4 trillion set aside. It's $3.3 trillion. It's an expensive battle. Hey, let's put it on hold, guys, because Donald Trump... Okay, you know what? We'll let him get all set up, and I want to finish my point then real quick.
Yeah.
The point is they're not going to blink, and I think the American public should understand we may have to enter into a short-term trade war.
Last night's debate was fun.
Which could mean